From Creamer Media in Johannesburg, this is the Real Economy Report. Our top stories this week. We look at the question of flying unmanned aircraft in civil airspace. We speak to the head of South Africa's largest steel producer about the group's power generation plans. And gold producer Great Basin Gold eyes the mid-tier horizon. During the first week of February, the Unmanned Air Systems Study Group of the International Civil Aviation Organization met in Pretoria. Keith Campbell reports.
A major issue in aviation today is the use of unmanned air vehicles, or UAVs, also known as unmanned air systems, or UAS, in civil airspace subject to air traffic control. The study group is working on regulations and standards to allow such operations worldwide. Chairperson of the study group, Holger Mathieson, explains what is likely to happen.
I would say that regulations will appear in a stepwise fashion. In the study group, we have considered that the most basic regulation which is urgently needed is most probably a new appendix to Annex 2 to the Chicago Convention, which speaks of rules of the air. A new appendix to that annex would have the status of standards in the Annex 2 and provide the rules of the air for unmanned aircraft systems specifically. And based on the work program that we're suggesting for ICAO, the standards and recommended practices to the other annexes, I think we will have to wait about 2, 3, 4 years before we see ICAO coming up to speed sufficiently to deal with the volume of work required to address unmanned aircraft so that we see the first standards in other areas in other annexes.
Meanwhile, South Africa's Civil Aviation Authority, or CAA, is working on granting special permission for a local operator to use UAVs for medical missions. CAA General Manager Aviation Safety, Obert Chakarisa, explains.
There's one particularly interesting case that deals with the transportation of medical samples for potential TB patients from remote areas into proper medical facilities. I think the challenge there has been that there's been a need to expedite the process by which the sample can be tested into a laboratory. The time is of essence. So we were approached by an operator wanting to use UAVs or UASs or remotely piloted aircraft to transport these medical samples through using the UAS technology. And we've been engaging this particular operator for the past few months, and we are in a position that we could allow that kind of operation under given conditions.
Concerned about the threat of rising prices and supply instability, ArcelorMittal South Africa is considering plans to double its power generation capacity, as Terence Creamer reports.
The power bill at Africa's largest steel producer rose by 30% to 1.3 billion in 2009. It would surge to over 3.3 billion by 2012 should Eskom be granted tariff increases of 35% a year that it is seeking for the period 2010 to 2013. Therefore, CEO Nonkululeko Nyembezi-Heita and her team are studying a big scaling up of power production at the mills, which currently have a capacity of some 40 megawatts.
We have calculated that our maximum self-generation capacity right this minute is roughly 80 megawatts. So there is a 40 megawatt gap that we could work towards, but it is a longer term issue. You know, if you kick off the project today, that won't come on stream for another 2 years because there's a design phase that needs to be undertaken. This needs to fit in within the processing as it exists. So it's not a short-term solution by any means.
Power projects, which could be fueled by production off-gases, were being rescoped at Vanderbijl Park and Newcastle. Bids would then be sought for the projects, with ArcelorMittal hoping for better prices than those received in 2008 when it first tested the power equipment market. The group's focus on electricity is informed by a security of supply concern as post-recession power demand rises, as well as a desire to find ways of overcoming a 90% power use cap imposed on it in 2008.
When we get to roughly 85 to 90% of utilization, capacity utilization, we start bumping up against that. And so there's an ongoing dialogue between ourselves, our teams, and the Eskom teams on this issue. We have not seen any indication that that's likely to be relaxed anytime soon. So it is a concern. It's definitely a worry. It would be a disaster if we had market demand we couldn't fulfill because we can't source power.
Work is progressing on schedule at Great Basin Gold's Burnstone project. Jonathan Fourie has the story.
Great Basin Gold reports that the Burnstone project will achieve first tonnage by June this year. CEO Ferdi Dippenaar reports on the current progress at the mine.
Well, let's start with the decline. I mean, we've made progress to the extent that we're just over 230 meters from holing with the actual vertical shaft. And then we've also started establishing stopes underground. And, in general, all that happens is the more ends you open up, of course, the more production points, and that's part of the ramp up of the production. Secondly, if we go to the vertical shaft, I mean, that's doing extremely well. We're down at 450 meters below surface. We're down at 41 level as well. We've got 35 meters of shaft sinking to complete the actual shaft. With the lateral development on 41 level and the 35 meters, we expect to have completed that by March of this year, which means equipping of the actual shaft starts.
He adds that the Burnstone project has a significant cost advantage over other deeper level gold mines.
Well, costs should be low at Burnstone, there's no doubt. If you consider that the mine, the shaft being 485 meters deep, we've started mining at just over 300 meters below surface. We don't require the type of infrastructure that would go with a mine of 2, 3, 4, even 4 kilometers deep below surface. So from a, let's just call it a consumable perspective, in terms of power, we should not consume as much power as the deep level mines. Support underground water, electricity in every measure. And of course safety, let's not forget safety at the end of the day, because it is about mining safely as well. So I have no doubt that Burnstone will probably be the cheapest cash cost per ounce produced in South Africa when it's fully operational.
And now for a sneak preview of this week's Engineering News magazine. In our cover story, we highlight the education fundamentals that have been put in place to make engineering the profession of choice. The state-owned Trans-Caledon Tunnel Authority expects to fund and implement at least 4 projects during the next 3 years, requiring 44 billion rand in funding. And there is much international interest in South Africa's nuclear technology. And in Mining Weekly this week, in this week's cover story, we report how platinum giant Anglo Platinum is using the global economic meltdown to up its operational game, mark time on costs, and cut mine fatalities. We report that AIM and Altex-listed Exploration Junior African Eagle Resources is considering a third listing, this time on the TSX in Toronto. And resumption of underground blasting is imminent at Harmony Gold's newly acquired President Steyn mine, where 800 people have already been re-employed. That's Creamer Media's Real Economy Report. Join us again next week for more news and insight into South Africa's real economy.
Engineering news. Not just for engineers.